Hello, everyone. Welcome to another series of Lunch and Learn. Happy 2023 and welcome, Brooke.
Thank you. I'm Brooke Seiz. I'm a licensed professional counselor, and as of the last couple months, I'm now an Institute for Functional Medicine certified practitioner. I've been certified in functional medicine for a number of years, but got a new certification and board certified in holistic nutrition, and love teaching nutrition classes. And so, always happy to be back to do some talks here. So this class is on the real food pyramid, and what we're going to be going over is really like the food pyramids that have come out through the years that have basically been guides for public health recommendations around nutrition, and kind of pulling them apart a little bit, what is beneficial about those, what's not. And when you see here the real food pyramid, what really does the human body need in terms of nutrition? And what we're going to talk about is there's there's guidelines we can look at for everybody, but then there's a lot of individuality to it. And that gets lost sometimes in these really simple food pyramid guides as well. So we'll really just be digging into all of that because, as many of you know, what to eat is confusing, and you can look it up online and find 10 different answers. And some of the guidelines don't always promote optimal health. They're more for preventing disease. And I'll speak more about that here soon. And then we will, at the end, kind of go over how do we put together a healthy meal? What does it look like? What do we want on our plate? So with the food pyramids too, they've changed over the years. We'll look at the first one that I know was sort of the guide when I was growing up that I saw for a long time, which came out in 92. How do we interpret that? Then it's kind of changed and evolved. And like I said, how do we eat for optimal health? So here is the 1992 food pyramid. You remember this, I'm sure, or those of you that watch this recording later have probably seen this. I was born in 80, so formative years I remember, like in the 90s, being well aware of this food pyramid. And this was oftentimes what was looked at for creating meals. And I should say this, which is interesting, I think. There can be this idea that, oh, Americans just don't eat well. But actually, when we look at research on whether or not people are following guidelines, there's actually a lot of people following guidelines. It's kind of like in the past few years, we saw when the government, when recommendations or requirements came out to wear a mask. Most everybody did, right? There may have been debate and controversy about it, but we mostly followed the guidelines if they were there and required city to city. And same thing here, when we look back at these guidelines coming out, a lot of people followed the guidelines, but the question really is, were the guidelines good guidelines? Were they really what we want to follow for optimal health? And what happened with health when many people followed the guidelines? So this one in the 1992 food pyramid is, we see at the bottom, there's 6 to 11 servings of bread, cereal, rice, and pasta. And so this is supposed to be the bulk of the diet. We'll talk more about macronutrients, so protein, fat, and carbs, but this already we can see is a high carb diet, right? We've got the highest carb foods are supposed to be the most that we eat. Then up above that, we have fruit and we have vegetables. And vegetables are not high in carbs, but that's the thing that they're highest in. They're higher in carbs than they are in fat or protein. So, and then fruit is, going to be our highest carb. Produce, we've got grains, which are a plant food, that would be higher, but produce, largely, the main macronutrient is carbohydrates. And then above that, we have 2 to 3 servings of milk, yogurt, and cheese, 2 to 3 servings of meat, poultry, fish, dry beans, eggs, and nuts. And then up at the top, it's used fats and oils sparingly. So this is a low-fat, high carb approach that was recommended in 1992. Some of this came out of the diet heart hypothesis, which was being researched in the late 70s and in the 80s. And it led to these years of low fat recommendations.
Mhm.
And like I said, many people did that. The problem is that a high carb, low fat approach can potentiate higher levels of diabetes and blood sugar dysregulation issues, inflammation. And so the recommendations to do that really aren't great. We'll talk more about what I'm about to say later. Do know that some people genetically do better on more carbs, less fat, and other people do well on pretty low carb with more fat. There is going to be variance there based on where, based on our genetics and maybe where our ancestors lived. If we look at different parts of the country, people that lived in Alaska or places where there's not produce, there's not a lot of carbohydrate foods for big parts of the year, would probably do well on a high fat diet because they're living on protein and blubber and fats through long, many, many months of not having a lot of carbohydrate food available from the planet in that area. Other people from more tropical environments might do well with more carbohydrates, with more simple sugar from, I shouldn't say simple, but like sugars from fruits and things like that, with leaner types of protein like fish. So will be individuality, but this is definitely a high carb approach. And we did see levels of diabetes continue to go up with the years of this, as well as some other chronic disease. The 2005 food pyramid came out later after that and changed some of the recommendations. I've used to teach at a school for nutrition coaching for students that were becoming nutrition coaches. And we would always look at these food pyramids, and I always like to just listen and see, what do you think about this? So can kind of ask you to look at this and think about, does this help you sort out what you're supposed to eat? And the feedback I got from students on this one is that it's kind of confusing to know what I'm actually supposed to eat. At least on the previous pyramid, it gave serving sizes and, was a little bit clearer on what should I actually put on my plate. But on this one, we see that there's this orange area. We've got the grains, so that's the cereal bread. We've got the vegetables in there. We've got the fruit. That little yellow stripe is fats, so butter, cream, avocados, things like that. And then we've got the dairy, the milk, and the meats and beans section. But a little bit hard to tell how to put that together. And I think in part what they were going for is making it a little more flexible for different types of diets and making sure just to include the variety of things. A little bit hard to tell how the plate should go together. Because of that, the next one in 2005, did I have those? Oh, this one is not 2005. I apologize for that. This one, I believe this one was 2005. But these are in order. So the next one was My Plate. And this one does help to kind of look at the plate and say, okay, we've got an area for grains, an area for protein, vegetables, fruits, and dairy. And it leaves it pretty open-ended. The protein could be animal protein. It could be vegetarian-derived protein. So that would be, beans, legume, lentils. Could be chicken. Then we have the vegetable area. It doesn't really identify if we're talking about potatoes there or if we're talking about broccoli there, but some sort of vegetable. It includes grains as well, and fruits, and then dairy. I won't say too much on this. The thing that I find that's also confusing about this is that we really want to think about the blend of macronutrients that we're getting in our body. And this leaves it fairly open to looking a lot of different ways. if we had potatoes for the vegetables and fruit and grains, we have 3 servings of carbs and protein. If the dairy is fat-free, then we're not really getting any fat in that meal. Some people now, really, there's a lot of people that don't do well with dairy at all. So it's a little confusing for the people who know they can't tolerate that or doesn't do well for them. What do they replace that with? And I'm giving a lot of criticism, but also it's pretty hard to make public health recommendations without and accommodate all the individual needs. So there are resources with a lot of these to help to individualize things. But I think it was headed probably in the right direction with the plate, at least to kind of what goes on my plate? How do I put a meal together? So what we're going to get into, I've pulled up a couple different food pyramids from other sorts of dietary approaches. And as I pull those up, just keep in mind, I'm not advocating one over another. Like I said, I think it's important to look at one's genetics, one's health conditions, one's I even think about things like Chinese medicine and Ayurveda. What is my kind of composition? Do I do better with warming foods? Do I do better with raw foods? There's a lot of things to take into account. What's my lifestyle like? Is my stress high? What's going on biochemically in my body? And what do I need? So it is definitely my approach to that. Not one diet is going to work for everybody, that we have to individualize things. But here are some other diets that are out there and their food. So I get questions about this one a lot. This is Dr. Furman's Nutritarian pyramid. I pulled this up because Dr. Furman promotes more towards a vegetarian or vegan approach. Generally, he doesn't rule out meat entirely, but it's more of a pyramid for getting a lot of plant foods in. Dr. Joel Furman, he's an American celebrity doctor. Like I said, he advocates more of a vegetarian diet, but he calls it a micronutrient-rich diet because there's a lot of produce, a lot of vegetables included. His practice is based on a nutrition-based approach to obesity, chronic disease, and he'd be referred to as a nutritarian. Is kind of the word he uses to describe the diet he promotes. It's gluten-free, it's low salt, it is low fat, and it is plant-based. And largely has a lot of phytonutrients, and phytonutrients are things that we find in produce that are important for health. So that's more to like the high vegetable, low fat, vegetarian side, although you see a little bit of fish or dairy or options up there. On the flip side, another health promoting diet that works for a lot of people would be a paleo food pyramid. And in this one, there's more animal foods in it, would be the difference, whereas this one over here has more grains and beans. Paleo does not use grains and beans, and it has more animal foods and more fat. But with both of these, look what's at the bottom of the pyramid. We've got vegetables. And I would agree that in a healthy approach, this should be at the bottom of the pyramid always, is non-starchy vegetables. Any diet for almost any health condition ought to include that, unless digestive issues are so severe that we kind of have to get off of a lot of vegetables or have them in a pureed, cooked version of a soup for a while. But those are in more like severe chronic digestive disorders. And it's not long-term that we would do that. We would just do that while we're getting on top of that condition. But for the most part, having this bottom part of the pyramid be vegetables would be a healthy approach and in line with what humans ate for millions of years. Which is always where my thinking goes when I am reading about nutrition, reading research on nutrition, is what did the planet feed us? What did humans eat for millions of years? What nature is supposed to produce? And interestingly, here we are in winter, and I was just talking about with a group about eating more cooked foods and warm foods or eating seasonally right now. And part of what happens when we eat seasonally is that these phytonutrients I'm mentioning in vegetables actually tell our body what's happening in our environment. There's a communication that happens that helps us be more connected and in line with what's happening with the season, which is pretty cool. Then next up on this paleo food pyramid, we have animal protein. So that can be eggs, chicken, steak, bacon there, fish would fit in there. Nuts, there's nuts, avocados, fats. So that's kind of that next area is fats, healthy fats. There's some grass-fed butter there. There's nuts, seeds. The next one up, we have some fruits. So paleo can be, I would say, moderate carb to low carb. It's hard to make it a high carb approach because it doesn't include beans or grains or processed foods, but it can certainly be moderate carb. It doesn't have to be low carb, but it is lower than the average American diet for sure. And then up at the top, usually there's some space for some extra processed food or red wine or dark chocolate. But the goal there with the processed food is that there's no grains in it. It's the paleo approach. So it rules out a lot of processed food. So there's a couple different food pyramids. We could create these for a lot of different healthy approaches that are out there. I just pulled these up because they're both really healthful, nutrient-dense approaches, but both very different. Just to kind of summarize the modern paleo diet, I think I mentioned most of this. It's grain-free, but the carbohydrates do come from tubers, vegetables, and fruit. And tubers being like potatoes are included, sweet potatoes, parsnips, things like that. And it's higher in healthy fat as opposed to the nutritarian is lower. There is an emphasis on naturally raised protein, good quality proteins. So this isn't my full handout, but this is the handout I put together that I give a lot of clients. And just to try to have some sort of public health recommendation that we can then talk through and modify. I couldn't fit the whole handout in the slide, but this is the part that has the image. I just call it the portion plate. And as I mentioned with vegetables, I would recommend, and this, you hear this in almost every health recommendation, is we want 8 to 11 servings of vegetables a day, ideally. And by servings, that might be a cup of greens, it might be half a cup of certain vegetables. So if you're eating like a really big salad, it can add up with the amount of servings. Have a lot of people balk when I say 8 to 11 servings a day, but it does add up. If you're filling up half your plate of veggies, you're getting oftentimes a few servings at once. So the rule is half a plate. If you can get half a plate of non-starchy vegetables, then with a variety of colors, then we know that we're getting a lot of those phytonutrients, essential vitamins and minerals. We're getting some carbohydrates. We're getting fiber. We're getting a lot of really important nutrients on that half a plate just to start. Then a palm-sized portion of protein is a good rule of thumb. That is usually around 20 to 25 grams, or 2 to 3 ounces. You're measuring that way. And that protein, this leaves it open for vegetarian protein options, animal protein options. So that could be lentils, it could be fish, it could be animal protein. Of course, if we're on a vegetarian or a vegan approach, we want to be really careful about making sure we're getting complementary proteins. We might need like beans and rice, or we might need some seeds along with the lentils to make sure we're getting all the amino acids we need. We have a fats area. We want to make sure we're getting a little bit of healthy fat in the form of avocados, olive oil, grass-fed butter. It might be that there's a little bit of fat in the natural naturally raised protein that's on the plate. Could be coconut oil. There's some options there. And then
Avocado.
avocado. Yeah. And then we have optional additional carbohydrates. So if the protein is vegetarian, we might already have the carbs in the protein. And it's also why I say non-starchy vegetables in the green area, because we're already getting some carbs. So then we can add carbs, which could be grains, could be, if we're doing like a Mediterranean type of approach, that might be quinoa or brown rice, could be beans. For a lot of people, that is enough carbs for them, is to have the vegetables with the beans and then some like olive oil on all of it. Or if you're needing a little more carbs, it could be some potato, sweet potato, a little more rice, fruit. So there's lots of options for whole foods based complex carbs. And if we are then looking at this, these portions are going to change based on the person. So when I use this handout, I have this as kind of the start, and then we talk through how to adjust this. We might X out the yellow area, or we might expand the yellow area, or we might make it smaller and expand the fat area. But the protein and the veggies stay pretty consistent. The reason for that is that we can only utilize so much protein at a time. We can use about a palm-sized portion, maybe up to 30 grams max at a time. We will, because we don't store protein. We break protein down into amino acids, and then those amino acids are used for various needs in the body. But we don't store them. If we were to store them, if we had excess, like if we ate a whole bunch of wings and we had extra protein, the body would start converting that over into sugar. And then it would either use it as sugar, store it as sugar, or turn that into fat and store it as fat, because we can't store protein. So we'll use what we can, and then we'll turn it into something storable. And that's important to know, because every time you have a snack or eat is a really great time to get some protein. It's a good time to have a little protein, because we can use some more every few hours. We just can't store it if we have a whole bunch of it. So that's why the plate stays half a plate of veggies and a palm-sized portion of protein. The carbs and the fats are the two that often move around depending on an individual's needs. And they're the most confusing because they're more addictive, and we have a lot of carb options out there in the world and a lot of fat options. And because we can store those, our survival mechanisms make us want to eat those. Because if I eat enough of those, I'll survive. And our modern world makes that hard, because now they're readily available all the time, instead of us having to find those and only have so much of those at a time. Again, we were hunting and gathering. So we'll take that fat and carbohydrate amounts and talk a little more about how to adjust those for different approaches. Like how do I take that portion plate and adjust it?
Max, do you have a question?
No, I'm good, thanks. I'm just
Okay.
turning my camera on.
Oh, okay. I thought you had your hand up. Sorry.
No, I'm good, thanks.
This chart I pulled from Chris Kresser, who is a functional medicine well-known practitioner in California. He's got a lot of content that I think is really helpful. Does a lot of good research articles online. And he put this together to kind of understand, like, okay, this carb confusion. Am I supposed to eat more carbs? Am I supposed to eat less carbs? How do I figure that out? And this isn't based on the standard American diet for high carb, because a lot of, like, the standard American diet, high carb is a lot more than, for example, 200 grams a day. It's way higher than that. This is based on what for the human body is normal, and what's low, what's moderate, and what's. So we see in the low carb area that would be considered less than 65 grams per day for men and less than 50 grams per day for women. And if you're looking at a percent of calories, it would be less than 10% of calories from carbohydrates. So when you hear keto diet or low carb diet, the very low carb would be like keto. The goal population that has been found to be good for is severe blood sugar problems like diabetes and neurological issues such as epilepsy and Alzheimer's. And so if that is something that one is working on, then this may be a consideration for that. Know that I don't know the specifics or the big picture of any of you or anybody that's watching this, so make sure you talk with a healthcare provider, if you're going to take this and make some big changes, because you might be on medications where a certain dietary approach is contraindicated or you need some oversight while you make those changes. But this might be a guide to start thinking about it. Input. Then we have low carb, which is 10 to 15% of calories from carbs. That would be, you can see 65 to 100 grams a day for men, 50 to 75 for women. This may be helpful for weight loss, if there's like pre-diabetes or just some insulin resistance, some blood sugar issues. Might be good for mood issues and digestive problems in that low carb area. Moderate, 15 to 30% calories from carbs. You can see here how the carbs go up for men and women. Generally healthy, this is a good place to start if we're trying to maintain weight. It's also good if there's a little bit of like hormone stuff going on, like adrenal fatigue or low thyroid. Can be good for familial hypercholesterolemia. So that's a genetic high cholesterol. That's a whole other topic, but high cholesterol doesn't necessarily mean it's genetic, even if mom and dad had it. It may just be due to lifestyle and diet. But if there is actually a genetic mutation causing significantly high cholesterol from childhood, it's usually over 250 as a kid and over 300 as an adult, and chronic no matter what. A lot of times dietary changes don't touch it. Then we want to have more of a high fiber, a little bit lower fat, moderate carb type approach to start. This 150 to 200 grams a day is a really good starting point. So if you're watching this and thinking about where do I start, I'm not really sure what to do, and you're kind of tracking your food and looking at how many carbs you're eating a day, 150 to 200 is a really good place to start, because a lot of times if we're on standard American foods, we're eating more than that. And then from there, you can start to notice how you feel on that approach and maybe make some adjustments. High carb is more than 30% calories from carbs. Athletes, highly active people, we're trying to gain muscle and weight. We have a really fast metabolism. Pregnant and breastfeeding women are going to want more of a high carb approach. So hopefully that's a guide that's useful for figuring that out. And when we have that, then we can go back to this plate and say, all right, here's what I need to get in terms of carbs. I'm getting some from my veggies. How many additional carbs do I want? And where are they going to come from? Are they going to come from a paleo approach? Like I'm going to do fruit, sweet potatoes, a little bit of dark chocolate here and there. Is it more of a Mediterranean approach? I'm going to have rice and beans and that kind of thing, and fruit, and decide what we do with that. So we mostly talked about why to include an abundance of vegetables. They have fiber for one, really important for gut health. So even on a lower carb type approach, the non-starchy vegetables will provide the fiber that we need for our digestive system. So we want a lot of those in there. That's I would say a pitfall I've seen of keto was really popular for a while. And one of the pitfalls was that people were trying to get their carbs so low, they weren't eating vegetables. It's not good. We definitely want to have vegetables. So we get fiber, vitamins, minerals, antioxidants, healthy carbohydrates. We can utilize root vegetables, dark leafy greens. We've got all the cruciferous vegetables. That would be, like in the cabbage family. We've got allium vegetables. Those are your onions, garlic, and a lot more. And the idea here too is to get the variety of color when you go to the grocery store, or if you're even putting in an order online. Looking at, do I have all the colors? Do I have purple? Do I have red? Do I have yellow, green, orange, white? And trying to get all of those colors in. Because there's over 5,000 nutrients and phytochemicals that have been identified, and a lot of the colors in produce are from the phytochemicals, and they all do different things. So if we're getting a variety of color, we know that we're getting a range of phytochemicals. These, I won't go into like what all of these do, but the carotenoids, phenolics, nitrogen containing compounds, phytosterols, all of these are different types of compounds that have different health benefits.
Maybe this would be a time for my shameless plug. We have a blog post called Culinary Literacy where we introduce people to unusual vegetables and how to cook them, and also discuss what are the nutritional benefits or health benefits of such foods, and also kind of cooking tips. Now, the end of the month, a blog post on how to save money on food is coming out, discussing how much the eggs and all the other groceries, they got so expensive, and how maybe we can save a little bit money on it.
That's great. Will you send me that info? I'll post it for that.
For the saving money on groceries?
Yeah, and the classes or the blog post. Sounds like a blog post.
Those are blog posts. Yeah, they come out on Wednesdays. I think I sent you a few of those, but I will send you the most recent. Yeah, it would be good if you could post it someplace.
That's so great. Because that is one of the biggest challenges, is figuring out, okay, I've noticed this when I get a CSA, in the summer, you get the box and you've got this variety of produce, but what do I do with all of that?
Well, also I signed up for the first time ever for winter CSA, because as I research these things, I learned actually Max just had a question about cooked versus fresh, and some of these the nutrients disappear fast, broccoli, and so the freshest we eat it the best. And Max has a question, Brooke, why don't you answer it since you are the speaker?
Yeah, I know you could answer that one too. Cooking does affect the nutrients in food. Sometimes it actually makes them more bioavailable. That's less often the case, but like with blueberries, surprisingly, there are some nutrients in there that are more bioavailable by cooking. So, and tomatoes is another one. So it's not always a rule that cooking will reduce the level of nutrients. Sometimes it makes it more bioavailable and easy for us to absorb, but often it can. And so the takeaway, though, because it also takes a certain amount of fire, like in Ayurveda, they call it Agni, to be able to digest raw vegetables. And in winter, we don't have as much of that. And I don't know if you've ever noticed this, but some people will, like I had a salad yesterday, and I don't usually eat salad this time of year, and I was cold all evening. I had to get it. I was like, it's not working.
Exactly.
Yeah. I didn't have time to make soup, but that's really what, my body would need this time of year. Mm-hmm. And that's probably true for most of us. Some people have a makeup that can do a little more raw food. I have more trouble with that sometimes in the summer if I'm indoors and it's air conditioned. So we're all a little different there. But the takeaway would be to lightly cook things, like if you're steaming broccoli on the stove, lightly steam it, leave it so there's a little crunch to it, but it's warm, it's cooked, and you'll maintain more of the nutrients in it. With soups, they're slow cooked, like lower heat. So if you do like low in a crock pot, that's going to be better than like trying to cook fast on the stove and it's boiling and the heat is high, because how hot it is will affect what happens to the nutrients.
Mhm. And also, as I said, nutrients also disappear by refrigeration. You know, broccoli, within 2 days, it lost 90% of its nutrients. And I'm just researching an article on artichokes, and actually there are the nutrients are more bioavailable by cooking or steaming, and by the refrigeration also depletes the nutrients. So
Yeah. Something else thought of on that. I don't remember. Oh, just that the nutrition school I went to had a culinary, like a natural food chef program. And I didn't learn everything that they did. I didn't go through that program, but they were really learning the details on like what temperature to cook this at or what temperature to cook that at and how to maintain the nutrients as best as possible. So,
well, Advent Health has the epigenetic program where they do DNA to check your epigenetics. When you said about what food we should eat based on, you know, more I thought maybe you were talking about DNA, like what is our DNA makeup. So they have epigenetics classes, like where they do a test where you learn about your DNA, and then they teach you how to cook. You know, and I think now they paired up with Johnson County Community College, so they have the classes there. They have weekend classes or during the week evening classes. So if anybody is interested.
yeah, that's great. I'd heard the Advent Health. I didn't realize they were doing them over at the community college.
Well, I think this is where because they need professional or you know, industrial rated kitchen, you know, and so that's where they are doing it.
Oh, that's great.
When I did it, they were at the country club on 71st and Antioch, like the new fancy country club, but then they moved to Johnson County Community College.
Okay. So we talked through veggies there, and then when we go to that like palm-sized portion of protein with every meal, we can include a little bit of protein at snacks. That is going to help balance blood sugar. So really good for stabilizing blood sugar, provides the amino acids, as I mentioned, that we need for all of our body tissues, for neurotransmitters, for communication molecules, for our hormones and enzymes. So pretty important for our mood, our brain function, sleep, muscle recovery, and growth. And then we want to think, if we can, a little bit about quality protein. And it's really great, Magda, that you're talking about like some classes or help or support on budgeting, because it's pretty tough right now. Things are very expensive. I always want to be mindful of that when we talk about this. But you know, eggs, has there still been trouble? I know even at Natural Grocers, which they have very good pricing on eggs if you're part of their rewards program, like $1.99 a dozen, which even conventional eggs have been way more than that lately. But that's a place you can get quality eggs. Local farmers or farmers markets are a good place to find better pricing on quality animal protein.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have a thought on that, Magda, or are you just nodding?
I'm just nodding. I have an opinion on anything, but or everything. No, but actually, they also talk about how the grass-fed beef is much better, even because of the fat makeup.
Yes. Yeah. So, and I know you know this, but with that, if cows, for example, are eating grass, there's more omega-3s, which is good for balancing inflammation in the body. So the tissue, the meats that we're eating will have more omega-3s, as opposed to grain-fed, which is the animals will have more saturated fat. And so if we're eating conventional meat, higher saturated fat, less nutrients, because just like we're talking about all these phytonutrients we get from vegetables, the animals will get a lot of phytonutrients from eating a natural diet, which is grasses.
Mm-hmm.
And so their tissue will have higher carnitine, higher zinc, higher vitamin A, beta carotene, higher omega-3s. So it's really like a totally different food, essentially, when we look at the nutrients that are in it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's why I sometimes have heard people complain about cooking grass-fed beef, that it's like, oh, it got really dry when I grilled it. So you do have to cook it a little lower temperature because the fats are different.
Mm-hmm.
Cook saturated fat, they can cook at higher heat without degrading, whereas omega-3s will degrade faster in smoke. And so you do get grass-fed beef, naturally raised meats. You want to kind of watch the temperature a little more to maintain the flavor and nutrients. Protein for vegetarians. I don't usually recommend potatoes as like the protein option because you'll get a lot of carbs before you really get enough amino acids, but they do have more complete protein in a potato. So that's useful. Quinoa is almost a complete protein. It's a little bit low on one for sure, and a little bit on another amino acid. So if you were living on quinoa as your protein, you'd need to supplement with some foods that have a couple other amino acids, but it's a good option. Soy, and again, with soy, I would use more like edamame or cultured soy and not rely on processed soy. It can become a problem. Beans and grains, so there will be complementary proteins, and there's lists of complementary proteins that are usually like a grain and a bean together, or a nut and a bean, or nut and a grain, or seed. So you just want to combine to get all the amino acids necessary. And know that that kind of covers your optional additional carbs also.
I also wanted to mention about potatoes. I just learned a couple of years ago about the resistant starch, so if you can talk about that.
Yeah. Resistant starch is basically a type of fiber that goes through our digestion and resists digestion. And so it kind of can make it down and have beneficial effects on the colon. And it acts as a prebiotic. So it feeds our gut bacteria and is going to help our microbiome, support our.
And it doesn't spike our blood sugar.
Yeah.
And so, like potatoes, if you cool them, it creates resistant starch. The same with the rice. They are cooled, and even when you later bring them to warm them up, they are already resistant starch. So I am like having my guilty pleasures of making hash browns on Sundays.
Yeah. You cook them, let them cool, reheat them. Extra resistant starch. Yeah. And you can buy potato starch too and add it to like baked goods.
Oh yeah.
And add a
Yeah,
little.
that's a good idea.
Mm-hmm. Sometimes I actually I make my own yogurt. I eat it every day. I have like a homemade, like really, really high probiotic yogurt. And I use potato starch when I make it to feed because I make it from coconut, which you need to add a prebiotic because it doesn't have the lactose that milk would have. So I use potato starch.
I made kimchi, this was the best kimchi I have ever made. Blog post coming, and I also use potato starch for it. It was, that just made me think,
That's so great.
It was very good.
Good. Sounds good. Then, like we saw on that portion plate, we want to include some healthy fats. If we're on a little bit of a lower fat, higher carb, then we use less. If we're on a higher healthy fat, lower carb, we need more. And the reason I balance those two out is that fat and carbs are what we easily use for everything. So if we're eating more carbs, we don't need as much fat. If we're eating more fat, we don't need as much carbs. And we burn those a little bit differently, but they are both usable energy by the body, which is where we can kind of balance those out. Decide what are we using for energy in our body.
And I think you read about it. It's worth mentioning how many healthcare providers or healthcare practitioners believe there is an epidemic or pandemic of Alzheimer's or memory problems because for 20 years we were eating low fat diet and our brain is 80% fat, so they kind of perhaps feel it contributed all to all the dementias and Alzheimer's. Yes.
Yep. Yeah, low fat is like a brain starvation diet. You need fats for all of the brain cells, the communication in the brain. So important. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I think about it a lot with kids and like this way I was eating that way growing up, to some degree. And it's a big problem. We need all those healthy fats. So like this Kerrygold butter is a great if you're using a butter. There's olive oil, coconut oil, palm oil, like sustainably. I usually say sustainably sourced because I can get issues with that with palm oil.
Mm-hmm.
But that's good for baking. I use that when I did I made paleo holiday cookies. I used palm oil for those. Dairy. Some people cannot do dairy at all. Other people do great with it. I would definitely recommend pastured grass-fed dairy options, but that can provide, if it's full fat, some good fats.
I'm planning to write a post on lard because my husband and I make lard, and my friends who are chefs or kind of who like to cook, I always, of course, you from slab of lard you make too much, so I give it to my friends. You know, I hope this won't be too controversial. And Max mentioned how Costco carries this brand of butter. Yeah, yeah. And also I wanted to mention even New York Times had an article about how full milk or whole milk is healthier than skim milk because the fact like it makes us more saturated and we just don't feel like, now I had skim milk, what else can I eat? You know,
Right.
so,
Absolutely, yeah. Well, and I always kind of, with milk, the main macronutrients in it are lactose and fat if we have whole milk, and lactose is a simple sugar. So if
yeah.
we take the fat out of it, we're just eating a simple sugar, which is going to maybe raise our blood sugar, drop it.
Yeah, if you eat actually cream, it doesn't have any lactose in it. So that's my excuse for splurging on cup of cream instead of cup of milk. That's why probably I can never lose any weight because I drink cream.
Totally. I know. I remember in nutrition school, one of the doctors said, ask the class, is low fat milk a whole food? And we were like, I guess not. But it seemed normal growing up that we all had skim milk, but it's not a whole food. We just took part of it out.
Well, and also now they say milk, like they still push like milk for calcium, even though broccoli has much higher calcium and kale and all of those. I hope my husband doesn't mind, but he was in a horrible accident, yet he didn't have a broken bone in his body. And he's 66 and they send him for bone density test, and the doctor said, wow, you must drink a lot of milk, you have such healthy bones. And my husband said, I haven't had a cup of milk in 20 years. So doctor like totally puzzled, because ever since he met me, we don't drink milk.
Yeah. Like I'm eating broccoli and my gut health is in good shape because I eat, so many other
So it was kind of amazing in a way. And
Yeah.
the doctors, even like bone doctors, tell you need to drink milk. Actually, the effect of there are research papers. The effect of milk is opposite on our bone health.
Yeah.
Is it okay if I ask a question right now?
Of course, of course.
I just want to kind of like mention a little bit about myself, I guess personally. I'm not too familiar with diets in first place, but I'm trying to learn and trying to change eating habit, getting older and visiting doctors when they finding, high blood pressure, high cholesterol. That's would be my doctor's recommendations and things like that. And I am married, so it's like between me and my family, we all eat together in our family, and we do cook a lot at home, and just like now I'm thinking that whatever vegetables we're putting, it's a usually like a long cooking process. My guess would be that a lot of vegetables probably lost their qualities at that point. And so my question is like, what would you recommend to do at this point for somebody like me who's not familiar with any diets, or like I'm really trying to follow up some of the terminology and like specialty wording and things like that, and ratios, and so if it's like a naive questions, I apologize, but also for somebody who like me personally, I don't like eating I guess vegetables at all, and especially when they're raw. Like I think it's some, and again, I'm talking maybe like going back to like a family history, when I was a kid. Like for instance, when I was a kid, we never ate broccoli, or we didn't have that at our like in our, maybe we didn't have it in our country. I'm not sure, but back then we didn't eat. So you give me broccoli. I know a lot of kids don't like broccoli, but you give it to me now, I'm not a big fan of it because I didn't grow up with it and things like that. So I'm not, I hardly, I guess, even in same, almost the same as fruit. So I feel like, yes, my diet is totally wrong. So that's, hopefully that explains my question. Thanks.
Yeah. I one thing just to say at the start is that I would start with just one thing at a time, because when you kind of try to overhaul your food plan, it can be a little overwhelming. And so like when Magda mentioned the blog on like here's a new vegetable and here's how to prepare it, one place to start, especially with vegetables, is pick a new one every week, look up a way to make it, and then adding fats, like this is a good slide for this. Adding fats to vegetables makes them taste better. So they're not, it's like if you do, and roasted is a good place to start with vegetables, and because it brings out a very different flavor. Like you take broccoli and you put it on a cooking tray and you drizzle olive oil or avocado oil over it and you add some sea salt to it. That roasted tastes, I think, and most people I think a lot better than like steamed broccoli.
Mm.
And it cooks some of the oil into it, which gives it, fats will make vegetables better. It's just kind of like bacon and Brussels sprouts versus Brussels sprouts.
Yes, I have exactly the same story with Brussels sprouts. I never liked them. I didn't grow up with them. I didn't know what to do with them. I always overcook them. And then I read a recipe, and you either have a slice of bacon, to this huge pot, or like a iron skillet of broccoli. And I said, well, the half of the slice of bacon is, it's not killing the huge bag of broccoli. So I mean, not broccoli, Brussels sprouts, so I mean, it tastes delicious because just a little bit of bacon totally enhances the flavor. Yes, Aldi does have grass-fed beef, but sometimes, if, as I say, people have love-hate relationship with Whole Foods, and often it's the same price as in Whole Foods for the grass-fed beef.
Yeah. And on this too, we can like pop back here real quick, is a good guide to start with. And I know that it's hard to take this and be like, okay, how do I take the meal that my family's eating for dinner and put it on this plate? For example, if we say do like at our house, we'll often have a night where my kids are like, we want to do tacos, or we want to do these like standard type meals that we might see. And so if I'm cooking a simple, like we're just gonna make sure we have some vegetables, we're gonna make sure we have some protein. Like maybe in the crock pot there's roast beef, and then there's some broccoli in the oven, and I throw some potatoes in with the roast beef, right? So it's like we've got some broccoli with olive oil, we've got some roast beef and potatoes. That kind of covers all those four areas. We have some veggies, we have some protein, fats, and if it's something like tacos, then the corn or the flour tortilla is your carb, your additional carb. The beef is the protein, We could put some guacamole with it, is the fat. And then I would cook a side of vegetables. You know, for me, I like a taco salad. So I might put a bunch of like lettuce and stuff like that. But I might cook some bell peppers and some zucchini or something on the side. They can put it in their taco or they can eat it on the side. So we're just like adding some veggies and maybe cleaning up the ingredients that are in the tacos. Maybe instead of, I'll get, we can even get like a better type of shell. So it's kind of taking the, how do I balance all of the types of food on the plate and also take the meals that maybe your family likes and just tweak them a little bit instead of trying to overhaul it.
Yeah.
Does that kind of at least give a start to answering your question? I know it can be a lot.
Yeah, it was an excellent question. And yes, Mediterranean diet. Yes, that's also a good approach.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Mediterranean diet is a good place to start.
Yeah, this was an excellent question. Many people started there, many of us, you know. When there was a chef, Bourdain, he visited Czechoslovakia or Czech Republic, and when he visited, he called it the country which vegetables forgot. And this is how I grew up, you know. We just had beets and potatoes and onions in the wintertime. It was it.
Mm. Yeah.
And carrots.
Yeah.
And same deal for us in or former Soviet Union.
Mm-hmm.
Cabbage, which I never liked. Stuffed peppers.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's kind of like what I see in a lot of this is definitely well, that your advice one ingredient at a time is good, because you know what I'm learning is like, for instance, you know, I'm a big fan and I can cook pretty good rice pilaf. I been using mostly lamb with it. You know, this is the recipe that goes back to, you know, like my grandparents cooked that way. But some of the either ingredients or the processes now, it's like, you know, we're finding out that they're not, you know, what about like oil, you know, using oil? We've been told like, you know, the high concentration of cancer is developed from just you know, like preheating oil, you know, and things like that. And it's like which oil, you know, it's the recipe calls for specific that specific recipe. If you alternate, but like I said, you know, like if I do the slow cooking beef or whatever in a crock pot, right, slow cooker, and we just recently done that. But then do vegetables separately. That's gonna be the new step for me. You know, some of it is I'm very familiar with. Some of it is just kind of like alternating, then mixing at the plate altogether. I guess that's kind of I see more realistic.
Or see me, I can show you some simple cookbooks.
Sure.
Rumor has it you work at the library, so I can show you some cookbooks.
Yeah, that's definitely good benefit. I have to apologize. I might continue on recording at 1 o'clock. I have to bail out. So nice to meet you.
Well, thank you for attending.
Thank you very much.
And I will just I just have a couple of slides and we'll wrap up because we're almost at 1 o'clock. We talked through the optional additional carbs already and adding a little bit of fruit. I usually say 2 to 3 servings a day. At most, we can eat fruit seasonally also. We can eat it more in abundance when it's in season. Our bodies be ready to store up energy for winter, in the fall, in the summer, and in the fall. And then less of it through the winter until it kind of comes back and is available. And then I'm going to skip, I threw in some on nutrients, sleep, which just in case we had time, and we had good, I think, conversation about just putting the plate together, which was the main focus of today. So we can go over some of those in a future class, which wraps up our class. And
all right.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you very much. This was excellent. And we have more series coming up in the future, so join us.